My name is Ruth Ellington. I am 64 years old, and for most of my life, I have been the quiet force behind every room I ever stood in. I built my career in finance with a steady hand, rose through the ranks with patience rather than pride, and learned to carry myself with the kind of calm that people often mistake for weakness. I never corrected them. I let silence do the work. That was who I was on the morning I walked into the wedding I had paid for entirely, with the hope that my son might start a life built on love rather than appearances. I never imagined that the most humiliating moment of my life would bloom in the center of the ballroom I helped fund. It happened so fast that my breath came out in a hard, stunned gasp. The chandeliers above me flickered against the polished marble floors, and every sound seemed too sharp, too bright, as if the world had leaned closer just to watch me fall. I had just stepped forward to congratulate the bride when she turned toward the group of wealthy relatives gathered behind her. She lifted her champagne glass higher, pointed straight at me, and spoke with a careless smile that sliced through the air. "This is the old fat pig we have to put up with." Her voice rang out clear enough for the entire room to hear. My heart lurched, not because of the insult, but because of the laughter that followed. Polished shoes shifted on the floor. Sequins glittered on elegant evening gowns. A dozen strangers looked at me as if I were a joke delivered for their amusement. I stood still, the lace sleeves of my navy dress brushing my skin like a reminder to remain composed. Somewhere in the noise, I heard a chair scrape. I saw a flash of movement at the edge of my vision. My son, Daniel, lowered his eyes to the ground and pretended not to see me. That was the part that broke something inside my chest with the clean precision of glass shattering on tile. Then the air shifted. The father of the bride stepped forward with his wine glass nearly slipping from his hand. His face drained of color as he stared at me with an expression caught between disbelief and dread. "Wait, aren't you my new boss?" The entire table fell silent. Forks stopped mid-air. Someone's breath hitched sharply. All at once, the laughter collapsed into a heavy stillness that wrapped itself around the room. I did not move. I did not blink. I simply stood there and let the truth settle into every corner of the wedding hall. Because yes, only a week earlier, I had accepted the position of Chief Executive Officer at Jefferstone Holdings, the very company that employed the bride's entire family, including her father. No one at the wedding knew, not Daniel, not the bride, not a single guest who had spent the last 15 minutes whispering about the old woman who had paid for everything. They had no idea that the woman standing in the soft light near the floral arch had spent 40 years building a reputation for quiet brilliance. They had no idea that their insult had landed not at the feet of a powerless mother, but at the feet of the person who now possessed more influence over their financial future than they could begin to imagine. I felt the weight of my silver leaf brooch shift gently on my chest, the one my late husband had given me during a winter long gone. He once told me that strength is not loud. Strength is the woman who keeps standing when the world expects her to bow. His voice returned to me in a single moment that felt both painful and steadying. So I inhaled slowly and raised my chin. The bride's smile faltered. Her relatives glanced around as if searching for a door that would let them undo the last 30 seconds. Daniel finally looked up. His eyes darted toward the bride's father, then to me, then back to the floor. A flush of shame crawled up his neck. Someone near the stage whispered a warning. The band shifted on their feet. Even the servers paused, balancing trays with a sudden caution as if the room itself had tilted. I did not say a word. I did not need to. Silence carried more authority than anything I could have spoken aloud. My entire life had prepared me for this moment. Decades of holding families together. Years of keeping my voice measured for the sake of peace. Entire seasons of swallowing disrespect with grace because I believed restraint was my safest language. But that day, silence no longer surrendered. It was the beginning of something else, something steadier, something earned. Standing in the middle of the wedding I had funded, surrounded by flowers I had chosen and music I had approved, I felt a strange and quiet certainty settle into my bones. I understood with perfect clarity that this humiliation was not the end of my story. It was the start of the truth finally unfolding. It was the moment the world revealed itself and the moment I stopped apologizing for taking up space in it. Before the next scene of my life turned the page, I allowed myself one final breath in that heavy silence. The chandeliers hummed. The music stalled, and every gaze in the room anchored itself on the woman they had mocked only seconds earlier, the woman they now realized held far more power than they ever suspected. And just like that, the wedding shifted. Not because I demanded respect, but because the truth had spoken for me. If you are here, stay with this story. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Your support helps us share more stories of quiet strength and second chances, and it means more than you know. The moment the room fell silent, everything around me sharpened in a way that felt almost unreal, as if someone had slowed the world by half. The laughter that had stung my skin only seconds earlier still echoed faintly in the corners of the ballroom, but now it thinned out into something colder. The chandeliers above swayed gently in the draft from the air conditioning vents, and the cool air brushed the back of my neck like a reminder that humiliation has a temperature. It is not hot like anger. It is cold, sharp, and strangely hollow. I felt that hollowness climb through my ribs as I stood in the center of the room that I had paid for, my hands soft at my sides, my spine the only thing holding me upright. People stared, pretending not to stare. Dresses rustled against the floor. Someone shifted their footing. The brightness of the lights felt almost aggressive as they spilled over my shoulders and face. Yet the only thing I truly saw in that moment was my son, Daniel. My boy who had once clung to my arm in crowded places. My boy who used to look at me with the kind of trust children reserve only for the safest person they know. Now he glanced away as if my eyes were something painful to meet. He studied the floor with a stiffness that traveled up his shoulders, and that small act of avoidance hit me harder than the insult itself. It was the first crack that truly sounded like glass breaking deep inside me. My fingers brushed the silver leaf brooch pinned to my dress, the one my late husband had given me during the final winter of his life. The cool metal steadied me. I remembered the weight of his hand in mine during those long hospital nights and the softness of his voice when he whispered the last words he ever spoke to me. Do not let anyone make you smaller than you are. His breath had trembled when he said it. Mine trembled now as I silently repeated it to myself, not as a plea, but as an anchor. The room pulsed around me. Guests exchanged uncertain glances, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in power after the bride's father recognized me. I could almost feel the questions rising in the air. How could the woman they had mocked carry enough authority to terrify one of their own? How could she have stepped so quietly into the role of chief executive without a whisper reaching their circles? Yet that was the truth. A week earlier, I had accepted the position in complete silence. I did not want congratulations or celebrations. I wanted space. I wanted the freedom to step into a new chapter without ceremony, without noise. No one in this room knew because I had chosen not to tell them. That choice echoed now with unexpected force. As the father of the bride stood frozen, a flush creeping up his neck, a faint tremor of disbelief passed across the faces behind him. Sienna, in her pale gown, shifted uneasily, her proud posture softened by something almost like fear. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. She had insulted me with the confidence of someone who believed she understood the hierarchy of the world, yet she had built that confidence on assumptions. She thought wealth alone dictated respect. She thought I was alone, powerless, grateful to be included. She never imagined that I had spent months steering a corporation through financial storms, or that I carried decades of experience behind my calm demeanor. Daniel glanced at me again, only briefly, and I wondered if he recognized the woman standing in front of him. The distance between us had begun long before this wedding, Ever since he met Sienna, I had watched him drift away inch by inch. Calls became shorter, visits became rarer. His tone cooled without explanation. He wanted to impress her world and feared that mine was too modest, too ordinary. I felt that ache now as I looked at him. A mother can survive many wounds, but disappointment delivered by her own child has a particular weight. Yet in the middle of that weight, something steadied in me. The brooch lay warm under my palm. My husband's voice lingered like a steady pulse under the noise. The air conditioning hummed. My breath deepened. I found myself rooting to the floor as if I belonged to it. I lifted my chin just slightly. Not enough to challenge anyone. Enough to remember who I was. Enough to reclaim the inches I had lost over the years through quiet sacrifices, polite silences, and the small daily ways a woman can shrink to keep peace. I did not correct the bride. I did not reassure her father. I did not defend myself or explain my title. Authority does not need an introduction. It simply stands where it stands. I did not answer them. I simply stood tall and in silence. I remained standing in that frozen corner of the ballroom, but inside my chest, another scene began unfolding. It rose slowly, like a memory pushing its way through cold water. People around me returned to their chatter with uneasy restraint, yet their voices blurred into a soft hum. The chandelier lights softened. The air cooled again. My mind drifted back to the phone call that had started this entire unraveling. It was 7 months earlier. I had been sitting at my kitchen table sorting through quarterly reports while the kettle warmed on the stove. When the phone rang and Daniel's name appeared on the screen, I felt that small, familiar lift in my heart. I answered with warmth, expecting conversation, maybe an update about his new job or future plans. Instead, his voice came in tight and rehearsed. He wanted a wedding. Not just any wedding, but one that would impress Sienna's wealthy family. He named the venue first, then the number of guests, then the designer her family preferred. His tone sharpened each time he mentioned the word expectation. I remember how my fingers tightened around the mug I held. 40 years of financial discipline gave me the immediate calculation. $380,000. More than most people made in years. More than I had ever spent on anything besides a mortgage or medical bills. His voice wavered only once. Mom, it would mean a lot to us. The request was dressed as a plea but carried the weight of entitlement. I heard it. I understood it. Yet I agreed before my common sense could steady me. The words floated from my mouth with a softness that betrayed me. Of course, Daniel. I want you to have what you need. The moment I hung up, the truth hit me. I had not been asked. I had been positioned. And worse, I had allowed it. Later that week, I sat across from my oldest friend, Helen Miro. She had spent decades practicing law with a spine as straight as a ruler and a mind sharp enough to cut through any illusion. Retirement had only softened her schedule, not her instinct for truth. When I told her about the cost of the wedding, she set her teacup down with deliberate care and looked directly at me. Ruth, that girl does not love you. She loves what you can provide. Her voice was steady, not cruel, and that steadiness landed harder than anger ever could. I wanted to defend Sienna. I wanted to defend Daniel. I wanted to defend myself. Instead, I stared at the steam curling from my tea and felt an old ache return, the one that reminded me how many years I had spent pouring into others until my own cup ran dry. Helen reached across the table and touched my wrist. Ruth, love is not proven by sacrifice. Love is proven by reciprocity. Her words followed me home that night and lingered in the quiet corners of my mind for months. As I stood in the ballroom now, surrounded by strangers dressed in luxury, my thoughts drifted further back, to the nights when Daniel was a small boy and I held our household together while my husband fought an illness we both pretended not to win. Money was tight. Time was tighter. I worked long hours at the finance firm, then rushed home to manage medications, cook meals, check homework, soothe fears. I remember Daniel falling asleep on my lap during those years, his little hand curled into the fabric of my blouse. He used to whisper that I was the strongest person he knew. I wondered when that belief had faded from him. I wondered when my sacrifices had become invisible. I wondered if the years of holding everything together had unintentionally taught him that I existed to absorb burdens without question. The ache deepened. Moral conflict has a way of slicing through memory with precision. Had I raised my son to be generous, or had I raised him to assume I would always give? Had I taught him resilience, or had I taught him dependency? Had I shown him love, or had I shown him how to take advantage of it? The questions circled inside me like a tightening ring. A soft clatter pulled me back to the present. A server passed by with a tray of champagne, but his eyes flicked toward the bride's family with subtle confusion. They were adjusting themselves quickly, trying to smooth over their earlier cruelty with polite expressions and controlled smiles. Yet their intention was still visible in the way they positioned themselves away from me, creating a small but deliberate separation. Even now, after the shock of learning who I was, they tried to distance themselves in ways they believed I would not notice. Sienna whispered to her mother. Her mother whispered to another relative. Their glances toward me were coated with a thin varnish of forced respect, not genuine remorse. I watched them for a moment, feeling both the sting and the clarity of it. They had wanted my money, not my presence. They had wanted my contribution, not my dignity, and I had allowed myself to believe that financing a wedding would secure the illusion of family unity. Now the truth stood in front of me wearing silk dresses and carefully practiced smiles. The music resumed. Guests resumed their scripted chatter, yet inside me something steadied. The weight of the years, the cost of sacrifices, the truth of their intentions, all of it aligned into a single quiet realization. There are prices a person can pay with money. Tonight, the price was different. Tonight, I paid with my dignity. The air in the ballroom tightened again, not with laughter this time, but with something far heavier. A hush moved through the space like a slow ripple. I could feel it press against my skin in a cool, steady wave. The father of the bride, still pale from his realization, stepped toward me with a stiffness that revealed everything he was trying to hide. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie. His voice, which earlier had boomed across the table with the confidence of a man accustomed to being respected, now thinned into uncertainty. "Ms. Ellington, CEO of our company." The words barely escaped his lips. He said them as if they might rearrange themselves into something less alarming once spoken. They did not. Instead, the title hung in the air like a bell still vibrating, its sound too clear to deny. The entire bridal family froze. Sienna's mother blinked rapidly, her smile collapsing in on itself. A cousin lowered her champagne glass so slowly it looked like a scene inside a snow globe, suspended and unreal. Even the young niece in a pink dress stopped twirling and stared with confused caution. The shift was visible on every face, like a curtain dropping between who they believed I was and who they now understood me to be. I did not look at any of them. My hands rose not defensively but steadily as I adjusted the silver leaf brooch on my chest. The metal felt cool against my fingertips. I straightened it by a fraction of an inch, a gesture that anchored me in my body again. The brooch rested over the place where my heartbeat pulsed and reminded me of my husband's last words. "Do not let anyone make you smaller than you are." The echo of his voice steadied my breath. I kept my gaze forward, but I sensed the shift in Sienna before I saw it. Her posture, once tall and proud, faltered. Her shoulders dipped. The false confidence she had worn like expensive perfume slipped from her expression. She looked down, then quickly up again, as if searching for a version of herself that could undo what she had done. Her earlier smirk had vanished. In its place was a growing fear. She had insulted a woman she believed was beneath her. Now she realized the cost of her mistake. Daniel stood near. His jaw tight, his hands hidden behind his back. He did not speak. He did not defend me. He did not even meet my eyes. The distance between us grew heavier. I saw him glance sideways at Sienna's trembling father and then quickly away, as though aligning himself with someone else's discomfort would somehow shield him from his own. That glance burned deeper than any insult spoken aloud. It told me that my son feared the consequences of association more than he feared the consequences of hurting me. Part of me wanted to disappear into the floor, to retreat into some quiet corner where no one could see the humiliation still red on my skin. But another part of me, the part shaped by decades of survival and quiet endurance, tightened its grip on my spine. My husband's voice lived there. My years of sacrifice lived there. My ability to stand even when the world tilted lived there. I wanted to vanish, yet I also wanted, desperately, to stand straight. So I chose the latter. The silence deepened. The band faltered and stopped playing. A server carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres paused by the mirrored wall, his reflection catching mine. His eyes softened with sympathy, a small gesture of humanity in a room that had just shown me its worst face. He looked at me as if he wished he could rewrite what had happened. That single glance, humble and sincere, reached me more deeply than anything spoken that night. My chest rose with a controlled breath. The room exhaled back at me in uncertain waves. Sienna's family remained rigid, trapped between shame and fear. Their expensive jewelry glittered under the lights, but none of it could hide the fact that their social hierarchy had flipped. They tried to mask their panic with polite expressions, but the stiffness of their shoulders betrayed them. Respect offered out of fear has a sound. I heard it even when no one spoke. Daniel finally shifted his weight and glanced up at me. His eyes darted away almost immediately. That quick avoidance cut through me like a blade drawn with too much familiarity. He was my child, yet in that moment, he was a stranger choosing silence, not out of respect, but out of self-preservation. I felt the truth of it settle into my bones, but I also felt something else rise to meet it. Strength, not loud, not dramatic, a strength that grew quietly inside me, shaped by every hardship that had come before this one. This wedding was not my undoing, it was the unveiling. I inhaled again, slow and deliberate. The cool air from the vents brushed across the back of my neck. The chandeliers glowed softly. My brooch rested over my heart like a steadying hand. I did not apologize. I did not explain myself. I did not soften the moment to ease their discomfort. I offered them nothing. I did not need to speak. My silence did the work for me. I did not need to say a single word. It was my silence that unsettled them. The ballroom around me slowly returned to motion, but inside, just a quieter world unfolded, one built from years of truths I had never spoken aloud. As I stood there in my blue dress, holding my posture steady, I realized how little anyone in that room truly understood about the path that had led me here. They saw an older woman who paid for a wedding. They saw someone easy to dismiss until they learned her title. They saw the surface. They never saw what lived beneath it. Under this dress were 30 years of work that went unacknowledged, 30 years of shouldering burdens no one else dared to carry, 30 years of becoming smaller so others around me could feel taller, and for the first time, a part of me wanted those truths to rise from the dark corners where I had kept them hidden. It began long before my husband passed away. In 2010, Jefferstone Holdings faced a crisis that nearly pulled the company into bankruptcy. My husband was part of the executive team at the time. The board panicked. Investors called hourly. The firm bled money faster than it could patch the wound. My husband brought stacks of documents home every night, dropping them onto the dining table with exhaustion written across his face. He asked for my help only once, with hesitation. He knew I had a sharp financial mind, but he also feared what it would mean to admit he needed me professionally. I spent weeks running complex analyses, tracing missing funds, identifying structural weaknesses, and drafting strategies for restructuring. I worked quietly, sometimes until dawn. When the crisis passed, the board congratulated my husband for saving the company. He accepted their praise with a tired smile. He never told them I had rebuilt the numbers. He never corrected the story. I told myself it did not matter. We were a team. His success was ours. That was the first time I learned how invisible a woman's labor can become when it is folded behind a man's public victories. I stayed silent. I convinced myself that love required no recognition. Years later, after he died, Silence turned into something heavier. I discovered the debts he had left behind, debts he had tried to shield me from. They were substantial, enough to reshape the remainder of my life. I could have walked away and let the estate absorb the loss, but I could not bring myself to tarnish the memory of the man I had shared my life with. So I paid every dollar, quietly, without asking for help, without telling Daniel. I worked longer hours, took on roles others refused, accepted responsibilities that stretched me thin. The world saw a steady, capable woman. No one saw the cost. I lifted my hand now, fingers brushing the brooch my husband gave me, remembering the warmth in his eyes the day he placed it into my palm. He told me that I had a mind capable of leading nations. I laughed then, believing he was joking. Yet here I was, years later, stepping into a role he had once dreamed of reaching himself. The truth was, becoming CEO had nothing to do with power. It had everything to do with finishing something he never had the chance to complete. I accepted the position not to rise above others, but to honor him. It was the final thread connecting the life we built together and the life I had to continue alone. My breath steadied as another memory surfaced, soft and bright. Daniel, at 8 years old, running across the yard with a wild grin, holding a flower whose stem had broken in his haste. He extended it toward me with fierce determination, insisting it was the prettiest one he could find. I remember kneeling to his level. He placed it in my hand with such pride that I felt the world soften around us. At that moment, love was simple. It was small hands offering imperfect gifts. It was trust without fear. It was purity I believed would last. The contrast between that boy and the man avoiding my eyes across the ballroom felt like a bruise pressed too deeply. Another memory rose, sharper now. Daniel at 25. His voice was firm, determined, almost cold. I want to build my own life. Stop interfering. I had stood in the doorway of our kitchen that evening with a stack of paperwork in my hands, frozen by the realization that he no longer saw my guidance as love. He saw it as an intrusion. I backed away then, stepping into a silence that grew wider year after year. A question tightened in my chest now. Had I protected him too much? Had I shouldered so many burdens that he never learned how to carry his own? Had I taught him generosity through example or entitlement, through habit? The weight of those questions pressed into me as steadily as the music beginning again around the room. Sienna's family regained their composed posture, but I could still see the edges of their discomfort. Their glances shifted from me to each other with a tension they could not smooth over. They knew what had happened. They knew the humiliation had changed shape. Yet none of them knew the deeper truth. They had mocked a woman whose life had been built on sacrifice. They had belittled someone who had carried an entire family, an entire company, through storms they could not imagine. I inhaled. The dress brushed lightly against my legs. The brooch rested against my heart. My memories formed a quiet shield around me. I had once been the foundation of a family, until the day they forgot who I was. The morning after the wedding carried a strange stillness, the kind that arrives once the noise has settled and the truth has taken its seat. I woke early, long before the sun pushed through my curtains. Sleep had touched me lightly, but not kindly. My mind replayed the night in quiet fragments, not with bitterness, but with clarity. There comes a moment in every woman's life when the world finally reveals who has counted on her silence for too long. The wedding had done exactly that. I dressed with deliberate calm, a tailored charcoal suit, low heels, the silver leaf brooch pinned neatly over my heart. It no longer felt like a memory of my husband alone. It felt like a declaration. When I stepped into the lobby of Jefferstone Holdings 30 minutes later, conversations faltered. A receptionist straightened her posture. 2 junior analysts paused mid-sentence. Heads lifted one by one as I walked toward the elevators. I saw surprise in their faces, but underneath it there was something else. Recognition. Respect, the kind that cannot be demanded but arrives on its own when truth is no longer hidden. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, Charles, the bride's father, was already waiting. The deep lines on his forehead had not softened since the wedding. He walked toward me with an anxious smile that strained at the edges. "Good morning, Ms. Ellington. I think we should talk," he murmured, voice lowered, as if hoping to guide the conversation into gentler territory. I offered a polite nod, then met his eyes with steady composure. 9 o'clock. Large conference room. My tone needed no weight. It carried its own. Charles blinked, thrown off balance. He opened his mouth to speak again, perhaps to negotiate, perhaps to soften the blow of the previous night. I did not give him room. My steps carried me past him and down the hall as easily as if the building itself had adjusted to my presence. Inside the conference room, the long glass table caught the reflection of the morning sun. A few department heads were already seated, murmuring to one another with the quiet intensity of people trying to predict which way the wind would blow. I recognized all their faces, even the ones who had never met me. I had studied their records, their decisions, their impacts on the company. Jefferstone was no stranger to me. I had walked through its storms long before my title had ever been printed on paper. As I entered, the only person who rose immediately and without hesitation was Evan Lorne, the chief financial officer. 59 years old, sharp eyes behind modest frames, a man who had built his career on competence rather than volume. He extended his hand to me with genuine warmth. "Welcome, Ruth. We have needed someone with your steadiness for a long time." His words were simple, but they reached a part of me that had gone quiet in recent years. Evan was the kind of professional who valued substance, not show. He had read the transition documents. He understood the depth of the role I was stepping into. He respected the work without needing it to be wrapped in ego. In his calm presence, I saw the first reflection of how leadership should feel. Not explosive, not theatrical, grounded. As the rest of the board settled, Charles entered with a stiffness that revealed his unease. His daughter had not joined him, but I noticed subtle movement outside the frosted glass, a glimpse of pale fabric, a quick shadow shifting. Sienna was lingering in the hallway with her mother, both of them hoping to understand the new hierarchy without being forced to face it directly, and their hesitation carried its own form of panic. When the clock struck 9, I began. Not with a speech, not with emotion, with information. I placed a folder on the table and slid copies toward each executive. Inside were financial assessments, risk projections, operational inefficiencies, and restructuring strategies. I had spent the previous week studying every inch of the company with meticulous care. Not to prove myself, but to ensure I walked into this room prepared enough to steady the ship from day one. No one expected the level of precision I delivered. Evan nodded thoughtfully with each section. The head of operations raised his brows with visible concern as he read through projected loss patterns. Someone at the far end shifted uncomfortably when I addressed a compliance gap that had been ignored for 2 quarters. The air thickened with nervous energy. I had not raised my voice, yet the weight of my words filled the room. When I finished, there was a long pause. A silence that did not come from confusion, but from the dawning realization that the woman they had underestimated was now holding the entire structure of the company with steady hands. Outside the door, movement stopped. I knew Sienna and her family were listening. They were beginning to understand something they had never bothered to learn. Authority is not loud. It arrives quietly. It settles into the room. It changes everything without lifting its voice. Charles cleared his throat, but the look in his eyes had changed. Fear mixed with reluctant respect. Evan met my gaze and gave a small nod of acknowledgement, a gesture that meant more than applause ever could. I gathered the remaining papers and rose to close the meeting. My voice remained calm, steady, unshaken. I am not here to undo anyone. I am here to build what should have been built long ago. As I walked toward the door, I felt the eyes of every person in that room on my back, not with hostility, with understanding. I did not choose this role for retribution. I chose it for restoration. I was not seeking revenge. I was simply placing everything back where it belonged. The week after that first board meeting passed with a strange mixture of steadiness and exhaustion. I carried myself through long hours with the quiet authority the company needed, yet inside me a small unease kept tugging at the edges of my thoughts. Something about Daniel's behavior at the wedding lingered in my mind with a weight I could not name. His silence, his avoidance, his unwillingness to meet my eyes. It felt like an unfinished sentence, one I had been too afraid to read. The truth arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a thin envelope from the bank. My assistant placed it on my desk with the usual stack of documents, unaware that its contents would alter the ground beneath me. When I slid it open and unfolded the letter, my breath tightened. The notice listed a series of overdue payments tied to a credit line opened under my name. The signature on the authorization form was Daniel's. I stared at the paper, reading each line slowly, as if clarity might appear on the second or third pass. But the meaning did not change. He had opened a financial account without my consent. He had borrowed money using my credit. He had allowed it to default. The balance was staggering, far beyond anything a person could casually overlook. My hands felt cold on the edges of the document. The room dimmed for a moment, as if the walls themselves had taken a breath. I called him immediately. He answered on the third ring, his voice carried by a forced brightness that cracked at the edges. When I asked about the debt, the brightness drained away. He paused too long before speaking. Then he delivered an explanation so thin it could barely hold its shape. "It is just a small loan, Mom. Nothing serious. I am handling it." But the numbers on the page told a different story. The loan was neither small nor stable, and Daniel was not handling it. I listened in silence, letting him speak, letting him twist himself around a lie he hoped I would accept out of habit. I could hear the strain in his voice, the urgency beneath the calm he tried to project. When the call ended, I sat in my office with the document still open in front of me. My throat tightened with something deeper than disappointment. It was grief, not for the debt, but for the shifting image of the boy I had raised. The boy who once handed me a broken flower and believed I could fix anything. Now he used my name as a shield for his own recklessness. I reached for my phone again, but this time I called Helen. She arrived at my home that evening with the same steady presence she had always brought into my life. We sat at my kitchen table under the warm glow of the pendant light. When I showed her the letter, she exhaled slowly, shaking her head with a sadness that felt older than both of us. "Ruth," she said quietly, "Sienna does not know about this, but your son, he has been keeping something from you for longer than you think." Her words settled into my chest with a weight I was not ready to hold. I asked her what she meant. She took a moment before answering, choosing her words with care. "I have seen men hide their failures behind pride. I have seen them drag others into the consequences they cannot face. But Daniel is not hiding from Sienna. He is hiding from you, because he knows his actions would break your heart." The kitchen felt suddenly smaller. The hum of the refrigerator grew louder. The air thickened in a way that made it difficult to swallow. I wanted to dismiss her warning. I wanted to believe that Daniel was overwhelmed, not deceptive. But as her words echoed, another memory pulled itself from the shadows. It was the afternoon Daniel told me he planned to marry Sienna. He had stood in my doorway, arms crossed over his chest, eyes hard with a resolve I had not seen in him before. His voice was sharp, impatient, almost. "Before you found out, I thought getting married into Sienna's family would help. They care so much about appearances. I needed to look successful. I used your credit because I panicked. I needed a way to prove myself." His words grew softer as he spoke, as if he were confessing from the edge of a cliff. The kitchen light flickered gently, casting shadows across his face. He looked older than his years, not from responsibility, but from the strain of running from it. I waited until he finished. My breath remained steady, though something inside me was fracturing in slow, controlled lines. I moved to the table and lowered myself into the chair opposite him. The silver brooch on my jacket caught the warm light. I reached for it with 2 fingers, feeling its weight before releasing it and placing it carefully on the table between us. He looked up for the first time. His eyes glistened with fear and regret. When I finally spoke, my voice was soft, measured, almost quiet enough to be a whisper. How long do you think I was born to carry your mistakes for you? My words did not rise. They did not tremble. They simply existed, steady and undeniable. Daniel's face crumpled. His shoulders shook as the tears he had been holding back for years finally broke free. He covered his face with his hands, the sound of his sobs muffled against his palms. He kept saying he was sorry again and again, the words spilling out like water from a broken pipe. But I did not move. I did not rush to him. I did not soothe him the way I had every time life bruised him. I stayed still, letting the truth settle. The brooch lay between us like a quiet period at the end of a long sentence, a punctuation that marked a shift neither of us could take back. The weight of years pressed gently against my spine as I watched the son I loved unravel. I felt the ache of it, the sorrow, the longing for the little boy who once brought me a broken flower with hope in his eyes. But I also felt something else, a boundary forming in the space where my forgiveness had once lived without question. He whispered again, softer this time. "Mom, please, tell me what to do." His voice held the familiar plea of a child seeking rescue. I let out a slow breath, not of anger, but of release. I reached out and closed the envelope with one hand, sliding it back toward him. There are things that do not need forgiveness. They only need to be put down. The morning after Daniel's confession arrived with a cold clarity, the kind that settles into a home after truth has finally been spoken. I moved through my kitchen slowly, touching the familiar edges of the table, the back of a chair, the handle of the kettle. My brooch still lay where I had left it the night before, its silver surface catching the first light. I picked it up, fastening it to my jacket with deliberate care. Today would not be easy, but ease was no longer the point. Helen arrived at my doorstep precisely at 9. She always moved. Through life with the precision of someone who spent years reading contracts and hearing difficult truths from people who wished they had arrived sooner. She entered without ceremony, placing a folder on the table. "I found someone," she said calmly, "a financial attorney who specializes in debt rehabilitation. He will not make this pleasant, but he will make it right." Daniel arrived 10 minutes later. His eyes were swollen, his movements careful, as though he feared the floor might break beneath him. He did not reach for me. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply stood there, waiting. I appreciated the silence. It meant he understood the gravity of what was coming. The law office was a modest building downtown with worn leather chairs in the waiting room and framed degrees hanging with quiet authority along the hallway. The attorney, a man in his 50s with silver threaded through his dark hair, greeted us with a firm handshake. He introduced himself as Mr. Keaton. His voice held the steady tone of someone who has seen many families walk through the door, hoping to undo years of avoidance. We sat across from him in a small conference room. Daniel kept his eyes on the table while Mr. Keaton reviewed the documents. He tapped the corner of each page lightly, an unconscious gesture that revealed his focus. When he finally spoke, his tone was neutral. "The debt is significant. The misuse of signature is a legal liability. However, because you are the parent and no fraud claim is being filed, we will proceed with a structured repayment plan rather than criminal action." Daniel flinched at the word criminal, though no threat had been made. I kept my posture straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I did not reach for him. I did not soften the moment, Mr. Keaton continued. "This plan will require 8 years of consistent payment, minimum monthly contributions, mandatory financial counseling, a freeze on new credit lines. Failure to comply will result in immediate escalation." Daniel's breath shuddered, but he nodded. His signature was required on several documents. He hesitated only once, his hand hovering over the line. He looked up at me then, his voice cracking. "Mom, I am sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I can fix this. Just give me another chance." His words trembled with familiar desperation, the same tone he had used as a child when he broke something fragile and feared the consequence. Something inside me ached, but I kept my voice steady. "Daniel, I am not punishing you. I am choosing myself. This time, I am not saving you. I am saving myself." His expression collapsed. He sat back in his chair, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes, his breath uneven. The weight of my words settled into the room like a quiet verdict. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, not in age, but in certainty. He had always believed I would step forward and shoulder whatever burden he handed me. He now understood that this part of our story had ended. Mr. Keaton cleared his throat softly, not to interrupt, but to bring the focus back to the documents. When Daniel hesitated again, I gave a quiet nod, not of comfort, of permission for the attorney to proceed. Daniel signed. The sound of pen against paper felt final. When everything was complete, Mr. Keaton gathered the folders and shook my hand with a level of respect that steadied me. "You did the right thing," he said gently. Outside the building, the winter air carried a crisp bite. Daniel stood on the steps, wiping at his face with the back of his hand. He opened his mouth as if to speak again, then closed it. Whatever apology he was preparing no longer fit the moment. He walked to his car slowly, his shoulders heavy, his steps unsteady. I watched him pull away. A familiar ache pulsed at the center of my chest, but something else rose beside it. Space, breath, relief. For the first time in years, I felt light. The morning after I left the law office with Daniel felt strangely quiet, as if the world had paused just long enough for me to catch my breath. I moved through my house with a tenderness I had not felt in years, aware of every sound, every shift of light across the floor. For the first time in a long while, I was not preparing to save anyone. I was simply learning how to stand. It was late afternoon when I heard the soft knock on my front door. Not urgent, not demanding, hesitant. I opened it to find Sienna standing on my porch, her hair pulled back hastily, her eyes red and swollen. She did not wear the polished expression she carried at the wedding or the practiced confidence that had often accompanied her. She looked young, frightened, stripped of the persona she had tried so hard to maintain. "May I talk to you?" she whispered. Her voice trembled. I stepped aside and let her in. She moved carefully, as if unsure she had the right to occupy the space. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where Daniel had broken open the truth just the night before. The pendant light above us cast a soft circle across the wood. Sienna kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the table. "I saw the debt papers," she said finally. "Daniel left the envelope at home." Her voice cracked, but she forced the words out. "I thought he was overwhelmed by the wedding. I never imagined he was drowning in something this heavy." Her fingers trembled as she wiped a tear from her cheek. "I came here because I needed to understand why he would hide it from both of us." Pain flickered across her features, sharp and honest. This was not the girl who mocked me in front of her family. This was a woman confronting the truth of the man she had married, the truth neither of us had wanted to see. She took a shaky breath. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Not because you are the CEO, not because of what happened at the wedding, but because Daniel lied to both of us. He made you carry something he should have faced himself, and he made me build a life on an image that was never real." There was sincerity in her voice, the kind that does not come from fear but from pain that has finally found its shape. I studied her for a moment. For the first time, I saw not the arrogance she displayed at the wedding, but the vulnerability beneath it. The weight of expectations from her wealthy family, the pressure to perform, the quiet fear of not being enough. She looked up again, her eyes rimmed with red. Why did he think he had to pretend? Why did he believe failure made him unworthy? I leaned back slightly, my hand brushing the edge of the brooch pinned to my jacket. The memories rose without effort. "My husband is in a hospital bed." His voice was soft as he spoke about Daniel. "Our son was born into love," he had said. "But he grew up in the shadow of my illness and your strength. He learned early that mistakes felt dangerous, that failing meant disappointing the person he loved most. I fear he may carry that with him." I shared that truth with Sienna now. It was a truth I had kept tucked behind my ribs for years, unsure whether speaking it would help or reopen old wounds. She listened with a stillness that surprised me. Her breath caught when I repeated my husband's words. Daniel was born into love but raised in the fear of failure. Something shifted in her face. understanding, grief, compassion. She pressed a hand over her mouth as tears welled again. He never told me. He always acted like he had everything under control. I thought he was proud. I never realized he was scared. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was no tension, no competition, no need to defend ourselves, only two women sitting at a kitchen table, both hurt in different ways by the same man, both trying to understand the fracture lines that had shaped him. Sienna finally exhaled. I do not know what our marriage will look like now. I do not know how to help him without becoming part of the lie, but I wanted you to know that I see what he did to you and what he did to me, and I am sorry. I looked at her, this young woman who had once dismissed me so easily, now unraveling with honesty and fear. My voice came out quiet, steady. We were both hurt by Daniel, but each of us will choose a different way to rise. Her shoulders released a tension she had been holding since she stepped through my door. She nodded, tears still clinging to her lashes, and for the first time, we faced each other not as rivals, not as in-laws bound by ceremony, but as two women standing at the edge of truth, searching for their footing. We had both bled from the same wound, but healing, I knew, would look different for each of us. We were both hurt by Daniel, but each of us would choose our way back up. The days following my conversation with Sienna brought a clarity I had not felt in years. It was as if something in me had settled. The grief was still there, yes, but it no longer ruled me. I moved through my mornings with purpose, aware that the world around me was shifting in ways I could finally meet with steadiness rather than fear. That clarity carried me straight into the boardroom on a day that would determine the future of Jefferstone Holdings. I arrived early. The conference room was quiet, the floor-to-ceiling windows pulling in the pale morning light. I placed my folder at the head of the table, adjusted my brooch, and inhaled deeply. This was not a moment of revenge. It was a moment of responsibility. By the time the board members filed in, a murmur of anxious speculation moved through the room. Rumors always travel faster in corporate halls than truth ever does. They knew changes were coming. They did not yet know how deeply their routines would be challenged. Evan entered with calm efficiency, carrying several files and a small notebook. He offered me a respectful nod, one that acknowledged both my authority and the effort it took to step into leadership under such personal strain. I returned the gesture. His presence steadied me. Charles arrived last. His steps were hesitant, his complexion pale. He slid into his seat like a man awaiting a sentence. The wedding humiliation had shaken him, but not enough to soften his resistance to change. He still saw restructuring as a threat. He still saw me as a disruption to the comfortable patterns he had come to depend on. I opened the meeting with a quiet firmness. Today, we will review the restructuring proposal. Changes must be made for this company to survive another decade. I distributed the documents methodically, not rushing, not raising my voice. Authority does not need urgency to be felt. As they read, the tension in the room thickened. Several department heads exchanged uneasy glances. A few shifted in their seats. My recommendations touched everything from budget allocation to leadership accountability. No one would leave untouched. Growth required discomfort, and discomfort was already swelling like a storm cloud above the table. One executive finally broke the silence. "This is too aggressive. We cannot dismantle what has kept us stable for years." I looked at him steadily. Stability is not the same as stagnation. What you call preservation is actually decay. My tone remained even, but the truth landed sharply. Another spoke up, voice tinged with fear. "Cutting these divisions will create backlash. People will question your judgment." "They are welcome to question it," I replied, "but they will not stop it." The discomfort deepened. The paper in Charles's hand shook visibly. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to something almost pleading. "Ruth, if we move too quickly, everything we built could collapse. The company could fracture." His fear was real, but so was his attachment to old structures that were already failing. I met his gaze, not unkindly, but without bending. "I am not destroying anything, Charles. I am repairing what you refuse to acknowledge. If you want to keep your seat, learn how to work differently." He blinked as if struck. The room held its breath. That was when Evan spoke. His voice was confident, unwavering. "I support every recommendation Ruth has made. This company has been running on outdated strategies for years. Her plan is not disruptive. It is necessary." The surprise around the table was immediate. Evan rarely spoke unless he had something measured and significant to contribute. His endorsement carried weight, and the room shifted under it. Several members glanced at him with newfound caution. Others nodded slowly, recognizing that someone with his experience would not align himself with instability. He continued, "If anything, she is the first leader in a long time willing to confront the problems instead of delaying them. We either follow this plan or watch the company crumble under its own complacency." The message was clear. Resistance was not wisdom. It was fear. After that, objections softened. Questions replaced accusations. Concerns shifted into strategy discussions. The storm that had gathered at the beginning of the meeting began to disperse, replaced by reluctant acceptance. We spent the next 2 hours outlining timelines, assigning responsibilities, and clarifying expectations. I never raised my voice. I never admonished anyone. I simply led with the steady clarity that had carried me through every hardship of my life. When the meeting adjourned, the board members left in thoughtful silence. Charles lingered behind, his shoulders heavy with resignation. He looked at me with the eyes of a man who had just realized the ground beneath him had permanently changed. I did not gloat. I did not soften. I simply gathered my papers and walked to the door. Leadership had never been about power. It had always been about truth. And as I stepped into the hallway, feeling the company shift into a new rhythm behind me, I understood the full weight of the moment. I was not breaking anything. I was putting everything back where it belonged. In the quiet weeks that followed the restructuring, my life settled into a rhythm that felt strangely healing. There were still challenges at the company, still debts Daniel had to commit himself to paying, still gaps in my home where old memories clung to corners. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt like a woman bracing for impact. I felt like someone learning how to breathe again. One Saturday morning, I decided to clean the house thoroughly for the first time in months. Not out of obligation, but out of a desire to make space for whatever my life was becoming. Dust lifted from the shelves as I wiped them down. Sunlight spilled across the rug. I opened drawers I had not touched in years, sorting through old receipts, faded photos, and trinkets from a life lived half in sacrifice, half in hope. In the back of my bedroom dresser, beneath a stack of folded scarves, I found a small cream-colored envelope sealed with my husband's handwriting. My breath caught. I sat on the edge of the bed and held it in both hands, feeling the familiar slope of his letters through the paper. I opened it slowly. The letter inside was short, but carried the weight of a lifetime. He wrote about his gratitude, his pride, his fears. He worried that Daniel might grow up believing he had to outperform the world to deserve love. He wrote that he saw strength in me that others overlooked. And he ended with one line that reached into my chest and settled there with quiet certainty. "Return to yourself when the world becomes too loud." I folded the letter and placed it gently on my nightstand. Then I retrieved the silver leaf brooch from my jewelry box. I pinned it to my blouse with deliberate care. This time it did not feel like armor. It felt like a reminder, a promise to myself that I would not shrink again. Later that afternoon, as I sat in the kitchen sipping tea, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Daniel. "Mom, I want to fix things. I want to be better. I know I broke your trust. Please tell me what I need to do." For a long moment, I stared at the words. There was remorse in them, yes, but also a familiar plea for direction, a subtle reach for the comfort I had always given. I felt the old instinct rise in me, the one that wanted to reach through the phone and lift the weight from his shoulders. But loving someone does not mean preventing them from growing. I typed slowly, choosing each word with clarity and care. When you learn to stand on your own feet, my door will be open. Not before. I pressed send. The message sat there on the screen, steady and final. I did not feel cruel. I felt truthful. Boundaries, I was learning, were not punishments. They were guideposts. That evening, I heard another knock on my door. When I opened it, Sienna stood on the porch holding a small container of soup and a bag of groceries. Her eyes held none of the arrogance I once associated with her. Instead, they carried something warm, tentative, and sincere. "I brought these for you," she said softly. "I know things have been hard. I thought you might need a meal that does not come with worry attached." I stepped aside to let her in. As she moved through the kitchen, unpacking the groceries, I watched her with curiosity. She was gentle, careful, almost reverent with the space. It struck me that we had both changed since the wedding. She no longer seemed like someone performing a version of herself to impress others. She was simply present. We talked quietly while she stirred the soup on the stove. Not about Daniel or the debt or the humiliation that tied our early interactions together. We talked about work, about growing up under expectations, about the mistakes people make when they are scared of failing. For the first time, I saw her not as the girl who hurt me, but as a woman trying to make sense of her own life. Before she left, she squeezed my hand gently. "Thank you for letting me be here," she said. "Whether you realize it or not, you make people feel safe enough to be honest." I stood in the doorway after she left, watching her walk to her car under the soft glow of the porch light. Something warm filled my chest. Not triumph, not vindication, something steadier. I had not lost a family. I had simply found its true shape. The first warm day of early spring arrived with a gentleness that felt like a gift. I left my house just after lunch, letting the sunlight rest on my shoulders as I walked toward the lake near my neighborhood. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun, small ripples catching the light like fragments of gold. A breeze moved through the tall grass, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and earth. It felt like the world was exhaling. It felt like permission. For the first time in a long while, I walked with no destination other than forward. My steps were unhurried. My breath moved easily. The quiet inside me was not the silence of holding back, but the silence of healing. As I reached the edge of the lake, I paused to watch the sunlight stretch itself across the water. I lifted a hand to the brooch pinned to my jacket, feeling its familiar weight, but now it grounded me rather than reminded me of loss. My phone rang, the sound cutting softly across the peaceful air. Helen's name appeared on the screen. I smiled and answered. Her voice carried a note of excitement that made me straighten slightly. "Ruth, I wanted to be the first to tell you. Jefferstone Holdings just reported its first quarter of growth under your restructuring. The board released the numbers this morning. We are moving in the right direction." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the news settle. Not as a triumph, not as vindication, as completion. That chapter had been built from years of quiet labor, from sacrifices made in the shadows, from truths I had carried alone. Hearing that the company was healing brought me a sense of closure I did not know I needed. "That is good," I said softly. "But now I want to live for myself." Helen inhaled sharply, as if she had been waiting years to hear me speak those words. She laughed lightly. "Then it is time you finally do." We talked briefly about logistics and next steps, but my decision had already taken shape before the call even ended. I thanked her, said goodbye, and slipped the phone into my pocket. The warmth of the sun met my face again, as if encouraging the choice I had just made. I would take a break. Not the kind of vacation people announce on social media, not a rushed getaway, a real rest. A deliberate stepping back from the years that had stretched me thin. My sister lived in Oregon near the coast, surrounded by tall evergreens and quiet mornings. She had invited me countless times to visit for longer than a weekend. I always said I was too busy, too needed, too committed to everything but myself. Now, for the first time, I felt the desire to go, to sit on her porch and drink tea, to breathe air untouched by responsibility, to wake in a space that did not expect anything from me. On my way home, I thought about Daniel. He was still walking his difficult path, learning accountability step by step. Our relationship was not broken, but it was not the same. It was evolving, painfully, but honestly. He messaged me every few days with updates about his financial counseling sessions and repayment progress. His words were shorter, humbler, quieter. Not because he was defeated, but because he was beginning to understand the effort of rebuilding what he had cracked. I supported him with boundaries, not rescues, and for once, he was learning to stand on his own legs. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, amber lines across the sidewalk, I reached my house again. I stepped inside, setting my keys on the table, and stood in the quiet of my living room. The air felt different, not empty, open. I walked to the window and looked out at the softening sky. I thought about the years I had spent defining myself through service, sacrifice, and silence. I thought about the crises I had patched, the debts I had absorbed, the love I had given even when it cost me pieces of myself. I thought about the wedding, the humiliation, the truth, the restructuring, the confrontation with Daniel, the healing conversations with Sienna. Every moment had led me to this still point where the weight of the past no longer pressed me down. I pressed my hand to my brooch and exhaled slowly. I had once believed my purpose was to hold a family together, to steady a household, to carry what others could not. But standing there with the golden light filling my home, I understood something my husband had once tried to tell me in his quiet, gentle way. I had once been the foundation of a family. Now I was the foundation of myself. And to the listener of this story, I will ask you the same question that has reshaped my life. What about you? Have you ever stood up once in your life for your own sake? If you have, share your story in the comments so others can find courage in it too.